The Victorian house sat on a rise overlooking the skeletal tree line of Cold Hollow, Vermont. It was a structure of brooding geometry, all sharp gables and wrap-around porches that groaned under the weight of the autumn wind. For Mark and Elena, it was meant to be a sanctuary, a sprawling, affordable fixer-upper where they could raise their 3-month-old son, Leo, away from the claustrophobia of the city. Mark, a man who had clawed his way back from a nervous breakdown 2 years prior, viewed the house as his final test. He was the survivor of his own mind, and this renovation was his penance, his way of building a fortress for his family. But the house fought him. The pipes rattled like dying lungs, and the draught was a constant, icy intruder that slipped through the unsealed window frames. The baby monitor was the first thing they unpacked. It was a sleek, modern digital unit with a glowing green eye placed on the nightstand beside their bed. The nursery was down the long, shadowed hallway, a distance that felt impossible to mark at 3 a.m. The tension began on a Tuesday. The wind was lashing rain against the siding, a rhythmic drumming that masked the settling groans of the timber. Elena was asleep, her breathing deep and exhausted. Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind cycling through a checklist of repairs. The rot in the mudroom, the flickering hallway light, the damp smell in the cellar. Then the monitor crackled. It wasn't the usual white noise or the shifting of an infant in a crib. It was a distinct pop, followed by a hum. Mark turned his head, watching the green LEDs spike into the red. A voice drifted through the speaker. It was a baritone, rich and wet, as if the speaker had too much saliva in their mouth. "Hush, little one, the mortar is wet. Hush, little one, the darkness is set." Mark froze. The voice was singing a melody that sounded vaguely like a lullaby, but the cadence was wrong, too slow, too deliberate. "Sleep now, sleep tight, beneath the wood, out of sight." Mark threw the covers off, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He grabbed the parent unit and sprinted into the hallway. The floorboards whined under his bare feet. He burst into the nursery, flicking the light switch. Leo was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. The room was silent. The crib was empty of threats. The window was locked tight. Mark stared at the baby unit on the dresser. It sat innocent and silent. He brought the parent unit to his ear, just static. "Mark?" Elena's voice was thick with sleep from the doorway. "What is it?" I heard someone singing," Mark whispered, checking the closet, looking under the crib. Elena rubbed her eyes, leaning against the doorframe. "It's the interference, babe. The trucker frequencies from the highway. Or maybe a neighbor with a ham radio. You know how old wiring is." "It sounded inside the room, Elena. It was singing to him." "Leo is asleep," she said gently, guiding him out. "You're tired. We both are. The house is just loud." Mark let her lead him back to bed. But he didn't sleep. He lay listening to the static, waiting for the voice to return. He told himself it was the stress. He was a survivor. He wouldn't let his mind crack again. The next day, Mark threw himself into the renovations with manic energy. He was sanding the floorboards in the upstairs hallway, just outside the master bedroom. The wood there was warped, cupped upward as if something beneath was pushing to get out. The dust filled his nose, smelling of ancient pine and something copper-like, old and metallic. As the sun began to dip behind the Vermont mountains, casting long, finger-like shadows through the house, the unease returned. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropping 10 degrees in the span of an hour. That night, the atmosphere in the bedroom was suffocating. Elena had taken a sleeping pill, desperate for 4 uninterrupted hours. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, the monitor glowing on the nightstand. "On, Bir, Creepypm. The static cut out completely. Absolute silence replaced the white noise. Then, a sharp intake of breath hissed through the speaker. "Shall we read a story tonight?" the voice asked. It was conversational now, intimate. It sounded like an uncle leaning in close to a conspiratorial nephew. Mark's blood ran cold. He reached for the monitor, his hand trembling. "Once upon a time," the voice crooned, deep and gravelly, "in a house very much like this one, there was a boy who liked to cry. He cried when the wind blew. He cried when the floor creaked." Mark stood up, gripping the receiver. He needed to get to Leo. He needed to stop this. "His father was a mason," the voice continued, getting louder, harsher. Asterisk. "And the mason knew that the only way to make a wall strong was to give it a heart." Asterisk. Mark moved into the hallway. The voice on the monitor didn't fade. It grew clearer, the reception sharpening. "So, he took the crying boy," the voice snarled, "and he laid him in the crawl space, brick by brick, layer by layer." The boy screamed, but the mortar filled his mouth. Mark kicked the nursery door open. "Get away from him!" Mark screamed, bursting into the room. Leo jolted awake, screaming in terror at his father's shout. But the room was empty. The baby unit on the dresser was dark. The power cord had been knocked loose. It wasn't plugged in. Mark stopped, chest heaving. He looked at the baby unit in the nursery. It was dead. No power. But the voice was still coming from the parent unit in his hand. "And now the boy waits," the voice whispered, accompanied by a scratching sound. "He waits for the man who walks above him, the man with the sandpaper, the man with the fear." Mark backed out of the nursery, leaving the crying baby. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The sound wasn't coming from the nursery. The monitor wasn't receiving a signal from the baby's room. He looked at the device in his hand. The signal strength bars were maxed out. He took a step toward the nursery, and the signal dropped a bar. The voice grew fainter. "Where are you going, Mark?" He froze. He took a step back toward the master bedroom, toward the hallway where he had been sanding the floor all day. The signal jumped back to full strength. The voice became crystal clear, devoid of static. "That's it," the voice purred. "Getting warmer?" Mark fell to his knees in the hallway. The floorboards he had been sanding were right beneath him. The warped, cupped wood, the spot that was always freezing cold. He pressed the speaker of the monitor against the floorboards. "I can hear your heart, Mark," the voice said. "It beats just like the little boy's did before the last brick went in." The sound wasn't a transmission. It wasn't radio interference. It was magnetic induction. The sheer psychic weight, the residual energy of the atrocity, was so strong right here beneath the floor that it was driving the speaker coil directly. Mark dropped the monitor. He didn't run to Elena. He didn't grab Leo. A horrific compulsion seized him. He ran to the closet and grabbed a crowbar. "Mark!" Elena screamed from the bedroom, awakened by the noise. "He's here!" Mark yelled back, his eyes wide and unblinking. "He's in the floor!" He jammed the crowbar into the seam of the warped boards. The wood screamed as he torqued it. Splinters flew. He heaved, his muscles straining, the veins in his neck bulging. With a deafening crack, the first board gave way. Then the second. A smell hit him, stagnant air, rot and dried earth. Elena stood in the doorway, clutching her robe, horrified. "Mark, stop! You're destroying the house!" "Listen!" Mark hissed. He leaned over the dark, gaping hole in the floor. He picked up the monitor and held it over the abyss. There was no voice now, just a sound. Scritch, 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 scritch. It was the sound of fingernails on stone. Mark shined his flashlight into the hole. It wasn't just a crawl space. It was a false void between the joists, a brick-lined pocket that shouldn't have been there. and there, resting on a bed of century-old dust, was a small bundle of rags. But the rags moved. The monitor in Mark's hand shrieked with feedback, a high-pitched wail that shattered the glass of the hallway sconce. Mark saw the face in the hole turn upward. It wasn't a skeleton. It wasn't a ghost. It was preserved. Mummified leather stretched over bone, with hollow sockets that seemed to absorb the flashlight's beam. The jaw hung open, unhinged, in a silent, eternal scream. But the voice didn't come from the jaw. It vibrated through the floorboards, through Mark's knees, and blasted out of the plastic speaker in his hand. "Daddy's home." The flashlight flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, the only light came from the green LEDs of the monitor, casting a sickly glow on Mark's face as he felt a cold, dry hand wrap around his ankle and pull.